So today's presentation will focus on 5 things: the state of the state, the elections and the legislature, the fiscal context that all of this comes out of, the New York State budget, and then I'd like to hopefully have a conversation about advocacy. So the state of the state is not news to anybody. We're in the middle of a recession. We're not going to get out of it anytime soon. We have a new governor, he has new staff, he has new priorities, and there are a number of new relationships that we at Schuyler and you folks as well will have to have with this new administration. So a lot of the low-hanging fruit has already been cut. The last couple of years saw significant increases in human services funding, and we're going to see more. On the flip side, and ironically, the programs that meet the needs of the most vulnerable are needed more than ever. These are some interesting statistics. 79% of New Yorkers say that they only believe that their elected officials are going to do what's right some of the time or not at all. And yet Governor Cuomo has a 77% approval rating. It'll be interesting to see how that we're being recorded, so I won't. The budget has passed on time only 6 times since 1975. I was there for 2 of those years, and it was very exciting. I do believe that this budget will pass on or around April 1st. 59% of voters are optimistic that Governor Cuomo will solve all of our budget woes, which seems very overly optimistic, and I have a lot of pressure for him. So I think that we didn't get into this mess overnight, and we're not gonna get out of it overnight, no matter who is governor of the state. So we just came through the elections in November of 2010. Obviously, we have a new governor, a new lieutenant governor, Robert Duffy, who's from Rochester, and a number of new agency heads, although I would say that some of the agencies that folks in this room work with the most and care about the most have not had their commissioners either appointed or reappointed. So there is a new commissioner of the Department of Health, but we're still waiting to see what's going to happen at the Office of Children and Family Services and the Office of Temporary Disability Assistance. So we're waiting on that, which makes negotiating the budget and advocating for things really difficult when you don't know who to talk to. I would say also that in the governor's office on the 2nd floor of the Capitol, we don't have anyone appointed as a deputy secretary for education, so there's no one to talk to there. Kristen Proud still serves as the human services contact there, so we've been working with her, but people's jobs are still kind of up in the air. And with most administrations, my experience at the National Governors Association, we always said don't get too close to the people who are serving from January to April, because they're generally campaign staff and they're gonna flip over in April. So I'm hoping that we'll get some people appointed on the 2nd floor, but right now it's just a really kind of strange time and confusing time when you're going to advocate and not to approve Congress. The fiscal context, $315 billion deficit. The comptroller actually puts that closer to $1 billion. There's some evidence of recovery, but I would say that that's, state revenues are still lagging, and we're still seeing a lot of catch up. The state general fund deficit is $9 billion. Again, the comptroller says that's a little higher. We generally are working under the assumption that there's a $10 billion budget gap in the general fund that needs to be filled somehow. Again, many cuts have already been made over the last couple of years. And in case you didn't know, 75% of the state's operating funds go to just 3 places. We're talking about Medicaid, salaries and benefits, and school aid. And obviously during the recession, unemployment rises, more people need income and other supports at the same time, and state revenues fall. The fiscal year begins April 1st, ends March 31st, hence the budget should be passed April 1st. Budgetary responsibility lies with the governor. He got his budget out, his first executive budget out April 1st. It usually comes out in January because he was new. He gets another couple of weeks, so he released it February 1st. The legislature then has about 2 months to debate it and negotiate it, but the governor does have veto power, so he can veto any spending that the legislature adds. Now I'm going to get into Schuyler Center's budget priorities, which I think will resonate with folks here. And if anybody needs any more information on any of these, because I'm just going to do kind of a quick and dirty, just let me know. The first thing that we're really, really concerned about is this governor's proposal of a new, what he's calling a primary prevention incentive program. What it does is it takes a number of prevention programs and lumps them into a block grant. They are disparate programs, meaning that they serve different populations. So there's funding for home visiting in there, there's funding for kinship care, there's funding for runaway and homeless youth. So, you know, we're pitting programs that serve little kids against programs that serve other populations, older youth. The funding is halved going into the block grant, and then it's made competitive. So counties will apply for funding, and they'll have to pony up a 38% match as well. And as we know, counties don't have that kind of match fund money. A lot of these prevention programs didn't require a match up until this point, so that would be something new. So we're really concerned about the PPIP. We're opposed to the PPIP and are asking the legislature to reject it. We have also kind of prioritized programs that are in the PPIP, and I would say that home visiting is the first. That would be funding for Healthy Families New York, funding out of Community Optional Preventive Services, or COPS, and funding out of the Healthy Family Trust Fund, which all pays for Nurse Family Partnership, Parent-Child Home, and Healthy Families. But, yeah.
You had said that under this block grant, the counties would have to come up with a match. I know some of the programs that you mentioned are not funded to the counties currently. They're funded directly to the agencies. So is this now a combination of programs that the county receives funds and then disperses to agencies, as well as those that go directly to agencies? And then if such, would the agencies also be required to have the 38% match?
That's a really good question. I'm not sure one that I can answer right off the top of my head. I can definitely get back to you. Our understanding is, and I honestly think that Division of Budget in the Governor's Office is still kind of fleshing out how it would work. But our understanding is that the money from now on would go to the counties, like I said, on a competitive basis. So there would be an RFP issued. Counties would, you know, if they work with an agency, we have talked to some folks about the 38% match maybe being a mix of public and private funds. So if the United Way wanted to put in some money, maybe that would be a way for them to do it. We want them to reject the thing outright.
Because no one thought about the fact that if they want now to send their money to counties, counties now have a level of administration that they didn't have, particularly for those programs they didn't previously fund.
Exactly, and one of the things that we've been talking about specifically with the Healthy Families New York home visiting program is that even if a county decides that that's what they want to fund, they're not going to be able to fund the administration and the infrastructure. So you go from having an evidence-based program to having something that's kind of just, you know, whatever the county can cobble together. So, probably an idea. Another proposal that we are opposing is the delay in the third phase of the public assistance grant increase. This increase was agreed upon a couple of years ago. The 2009-2010 executive budget provided an increase of 30% to be implemented over a 3-year time period. So 10% a year through July 2011. But you know, now when people need public assistance more than ever, we're going to delay it. So this is an interesting one. It incorporates the full family sanction to strengthen compliance with public assistance work requirements. So right now, if an adult misses an appointment or a work opportunity, they lose their benefits and the children continue to receive benefits. And we're not talking they missed, you know, a work requirement once. There is a, you know, what this would do is change the law so that we deny children benefits as well.
Oh my God.
I'm just the messenger. Some from the large crowd. TANF, temporary assistance for needy families, anything that receives TANF is eliminated. Funding is eliminated. It's $200 million, except for childcare and the flexible fund for family services, but childcare has its own issues. These funds, as you know, are used for folks at risk of becoming homeless, people moving from welfare to work. So again, a pretty hefty decrease here. Kinship guardianship, grandparents, aunts and uncles taking care of kids instead of allowing those kids to be placed into the foster system, not funded.
Oh, wow.
So again, we're trying to keep kids out of the child welfare system, but we're not actually hoping that to happen. We are pretty excited about the reforms to the juvenile justice system, and these are reforms that, in part at least, came about because the U.S. Department of Justice came in a year or two ago and found that we weren't doing what we needed to do at the state, and that kids were being housed in places that were certainly not going to be helpful to them. So, and this is very small print, so I can send this around to folks, but it aims to shift practice toward community-based treatment and reduce capacity by 31%. So we are certainly in favor of community-based treatment. We're very happy with that. We're interested to see, and certainly will be involved in how that actually happens, to make sure that that doesn't happen, or that it does happen, and that we're not doing, what we did a number of years ago with mental health institutions and basically didn't provide services for folks. Something that I should note with this is the Commissioner of Office of Children and Family Services, Gladys Carrion, who has been a pretty controversial figure, but has certainly been at the forefront of closing the facilities, has not been reappointed yet. She is still in her position, but awaiting word. So I'm not sure where that's going to go. Excuse me. There's a lot of talk, and actually a task force right now that's talking about consolidating agencies. And OCFS, OTDA, OASIS, OMH are all in that pool of possible consolidation. This is the SCR clearance fee, which if you work in a child care center, say, you would have been exempt up until this point from paying this fee, which is basically a background check. It's $5 now. The administration wants to raise it to $60. I think I heard yesterday that this would result in a revenue of $12 million for the state. We see it as raising revenue on the backs of the lowest income people. Medicaid Redesign team just came through with dozens of proposals that are now in the budget. One of those is to increase co-payment amounts for Medicaid fee-for-service and Family Health Plus, to require co-payments for Child Health Plus. The big one probably is to make sure that every Medicaid member is enrolled in managed care. These proposals are only good for a year. None of this is going to happen in a year. It's certainly going to take a lot longer than that. I would say that there's some opposition to certain of these proposals. We're pretty happy with most of them, but we're taking a really good look at exactly what they would mean and how they would be implemented. And that's all I'll say about the Medicaid redesign team. We'll talk offline about that. So a lot of what we do at SCA is advocacy and education. We spend a lot of time working with policymakers to get them up to speed on issues. We certainly cannot expect a legislator to come in and have a handle on every single issue out there. So we like to offer our services to serve as a resource to them. We've actually met with Assemblywoman Pollin's office 2 or 3 times in the last 2 weeks, and we'd like to think that if she needs a question answered, she can pick up the phone and call us, and we will give her the most objective and data-driven information that we possibly can. And we do spend a lot of time advocating. I'm a registered lobbyist, so I've spent the last couple of weeks wandering the halls of the Capitol. I was there from 11 to 7 yesterday, and just kind of doing what we do, talking to people. We have heard some positive things from legislators who are unhappy with the executive budget, but what we also keep hearing is we need to find the money, and we'll see how that rolls out. One House bills come out the 15th, which I believe is next Tuesday. So that's an opportunity to see the Assembly's budget and the Senate's budget, and then they'll sit down and negotiate together and give something to the governor, and we'll see what happens then. Like I said, not overly optimistic about a number of things, but we're certainly working our butts off to see that some things change. That's it. I know that I talk really fast, and if anybody has any questions.
Sorry.
Wake up. There's some seats up front here, if anyone wants to come in while we are sort of in between with questions. Cheryl.
I know this is really a massive taboo subject, but
Very hard
besides
to
all
hear
that,
back here. I know you're all, you're all
Maybe
stand
come in a
up,
little bit.
right? Maybe stand up, yeah, that'd be great. If anybody wants to move up to actually hear what's going on, that'd be good.
so I know that this may be a really taboo subject. In addition to all the cuts that are being proposed to balance the budget, to make up for the deficit, and even the increase in that new surcharge for the quote-unquote background checks, that again, hit, as you said, the most vulnerable populations, as well as the organizations that whose budgets have been cut already. Is anyone gonna be brave enough to talk about increasing revenue from folks that have extra money to spend, or they don't even need
Millionaires
it?
tax? Yeah, people are starting to talk about it. And I think that there are some of us who are hopeful that that will be a proposal from at least one of the houses of the legislature. It's certainly been, I'm sure you've noticed the ad campaigns from NYSED and from Citizen Action that speak very specifically to a millionaire's tax. So we are hopeful. There are no other large revenue raisers, as far as I can tell, on the table. The soda tax is not something we're talking about like we have in years past. So we'll see what happens with the millionaire's tax.
Or at least call those other things they're doing taxes, so that they can
Taxes
then
as
not
opposed
lie
to-
to people that they're not raising taxes. But
Karen.
This is good. Two things. First, in the Times today, there was a very interesting editorial about what the Connecticut governor has decided to do. And, obviously the circumstances of Connecticut, New York, New Jersey are all different, but it was very interesting because one of his approaches was to really put taxes on luxury items that only wealthy people could afford, which seemed to be very sensible. And I don't know if that's something that's being bandied about, but it was interesting food for thought.
Yeah.
Second thing is, how come we peons haven't gotten instructions from you folks up in Albany about what kinds of letters we should be sending to legislators?
Well, I think, and this is a great opportunity to get folks involved, Schuyler Center does do a newsletter called The Source that goes out to 1,000 people around the state, and we can certainly get folks on that. We have, we use it during kind of the off-season to talk about policy, but during budget, we definitely have kind of laid out our list of priorities. Winning Beginning New York also, if you're interested in issues rated 0 to 5, has a big listserv and a big e-advocacy campaign. I send out, a message a couple of times a month asking for folks to do certain things. So I'm happy to, if anyone is interested in getting involved, we're certainly, I'm thrilled to be here today and kind of linking up with what Westchester Children's Association does.
So just so that you know, we will have Jen's PowerPoint available on our website. We can, with those emails that we have, we can send you the link to that we have her contact information as well. And, sort of the next thing on our agenda is really to talk as a coalition out of Westchester on what some of those priorities will be and whether we want to set up a letter or an email through, I know most of you here have used our voter voice where you can just sort of click in and an email can go to elected officials. And we were really waiting for this meeting today to see what priorities we could all agree on to sort of put that in motion, so. Yes.
Allison, actually, Chris Dice, the Executive Director of Prevent Child Abuse New York, put together a lovely packet regarding Advocacy for Healthy Families New York.
Okay.
I could share that as well, if you need that information,
Great,
so I can
great.
share it after that.
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot of information. In fact, one of the packets that we had at the table is from Citizens Committee in New York City, and they're sort of packaging some of their priorities, as well as what Skylar has. Children's Defense Fund has also done a pretty extensive analysis and has some information available. And as we get it, we just, sort of forward it out to people so that you can have the information from the different groups and constituents, and you begin to see where some of the consensus is on the issues. So other questions?
It sounds like in the logic of all of this, that an increase in foster care placements is somehow acceptable. Has anyone costed out what that is projected to be?
I don't know, we certainly have not costed it out. I mean, one of the points that we're trying to make, and one of the things that the governor said in proposing the establishment of that PPIP block grant, was that it would prevent child care placements and placements into juvenile justice. We know that's not true.
At
So a lot of our
50% of what
messaging
it
has
has
been around, I'm sure you have the best of intentions, however, this would have the complete opposite impact. So we've certainly been messaging around, this is not going to do what you say you want to do.
Howard, do you have a question?
I want to mention that on the 30th, Westchester Early Childhood Directors Association and I believe the Infant and Toddler Network will be going up to Albany. We have a bus that is going to be leaving, and we're going to have a pickup in White Plains. So if anybody wants to join us in terms of children's issues and support the Winning Beginning agenda, we would be very glad to have you join us.
Yeah, thank you, Howard, because I totally think on that. We're doing Winning Beginning Wednesdays, which is every Wednesday in the month. We have a different region come up. Next Wednesday is New York City, and the Wednesday after that is Westchester and Rockland. So if folks are interested in doing that, we're making representative visits with local representatives and also with leaders of the chairs of our relevant committees.
Talking about, there's rumor about consolidating agencies. What kind of effects do you think this will have?
Well, I think it depends on really what happens. I mean, you see this all the time. The new administration comes in and they consolidate all the agencies, and 8 years later, another administration comes in and takes them all apart. I do think that there's a good deal of waste and duplication in some of our agencies, so I don't necessarily think that it's a bad thing. I think it will be interesting to see how it's done. Commissioner Mike Hogan at OMH has been reappointed, so he's staying. But like I said, we don't know about OCFS or OTDA. There is someone new at OASIS that's been blanking on what her name is, but she actually has done a good deal of consolidation work. So we think that she will probably be tasked with some of that. Kate Breslin, who's our executive director, had an interview yesterday with the SAGE group of folks, which is the task force that the governor has put together to talk about consolidation. And some of the questions that were being asked were, what do you think that such and such an agency could do better? Where do you see the duplication? So they are looking for outside input as they go about doing this, but like I said, consolidation doesn't happen overnight, and it's not easy, and it will result, I would think, in state worker layoffs. So hopefully not at the risk of serving children and families, but I think it remains to be seen, and it's not anything that's going to happen overnight.
I have two questions on that reorganization. First of all, is Paul Francis the person that's sort of heading that up? Because he's a donor of ours, and maybe we could call him. So you'll let me know. I think that's what his title was.
It may be Paul or it's somebody else on the second floor, but yeah.
And the other thing is, years ago, SCAA, which was then had a different name, was
We kept the acronym. But
right, was pushing the idea of a children's agency. And I wonder if that has come up at all. If they're thinking of reorganizing, is that something that anybody's taking up and looking at?
Yeah, you know, when I, 4 years ago, when Governor Spitzer came in, he talked about a children's cabinet, and I had done a great deal of work with the National Governors Association on children's cabinets, so we worked pretty closely with his administration on getting one up and running, and then lo and behold, the Council on Children and Families, which is under OCFS, and it kind of been pushed to the back during the Pataki administration, came forward and said, well, we thought we were the children's cabinet. We just haven't really functioned in that capacity. So there are conversations now about how to make that work better. That we have an existing Council on Children and Families, it's a state agency, and that's actually, they staff probably 2/3 of the Early Childhood Advisory Council, and Schuyler Center comes in and staffs the other third, so that there's a public-private partnership. But there's been a lot of conversation about how to make that and the existing, you know, Spitzer Children's Cabinet kind of work a little better together. The Children's Cabinet that Governor Spitzer created took on 2 issues, pre-K and children's health insurance, and basically did their work on those 2 issues, and then, you know, didn't disband, but didn't do much of anything else. And then disconnected youth became one of the issues that they took on. It remains to be seen how Governor Cuomo wants to use the Children's Cabinet, or the Early Childhood Advisory Council for that matter. We haven't really had any sort of communication from we honestly haven't had a lot of communication from the administration on children's issues. So, you know, there's a lot of focus right now on insurance, on transportation, on economic development is a really big one.
I guess I was talking about something more radical. No,
Actually, a new
agency that would
A new
pull
agency.
parts of OCFS, parts of, well, that's what OCFS was supposed to do out of OTDA, but
Yeah.
it's only a little piece. We have mental health, we have education, you know, all that stuff, which is.
Well, and we had talked at
floating
one point about a children's czar, you know, somebody that would have that job. We haven't recently talked about that too much. I think at Schuyler we've been focused very much on the budget cuts. When we have a little time to breathe, we may revisit that. But it'll, again, something like that will depend on the agency consolidation too, and who's actually doing which piece of what.
Jennifer, could you talk a little online about the Medicaid Redesign recommendations as they affect kids? Because
Sure.
they're pretty scary for any of us who are in the business of caring for medically fragile kids.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm happy to, we didn't sit on the Medicaid redesign team, we were kind of part of the advocates who kind of sat in the meetings and watched it unfold. But our executive director comes from a public health background and has some pretty serious thoughts on that. So I think we'd be happy to, you know, to talk to folks about that, and then if it's not my, you know, area of expertise. But we were not necessarily happy with the process. And we have yet to really kind of make it through the whole 300-page document, figure out exactly what it means. I know, right? But we're happy to talk about it.
Because I think for those of us who do serve kids, whether it's in the mental health arena, the health arena, or just the kids,
Yep.
Nobody can disagree with the notion that they need care management, but how it gets
How it
played
gets
out
done.
is very.
Yeah, and I think that's our
Very much a
biggest concern is making sure, you know, how these are actually going to be implemented.
Liz, and
Yeah.
can we just speak up and speak on the
Yeah,
background?
I was just looking at the agenda and listening to everybody's concerns, and there are a gazillion, and they're all legitimate. How do we come up with 3 priorities? How do you envision even synthesizing that? I mean, I have no idea, that's why I'm asking. I wish I
One of the
did.
things I can very candidly say is that New York Can met right when the budget came out and talked about how can we, because we are a group that comes to consensus on issues and generally puts out a statement, how can we do that this time? And we ended up not putting anything out. It was very difficult for everybody to agree on what to say and how to say it. We did all agree that we were against any cuts that adversely affected children and families. But there are some who would argue that some of the programs in the PPIP are evidence-based and have measurable outcomes, and others are not. So it's, we're kind of walking a tightrope, but I would say that, you know, any statement that this group wanted to put out would probably have to be pretty broad and would have to be, you know, don't balance the budget on the backs of children and families. Don't, with the SCR clearance, you know, don't raise $12 million from the lowest income child welfare and child care workers who, you know, can't afford that. So.
Wow, you know, it's one thing in sharing the load or sharing the burden, but that's what I would share.
Yeah, but that's not sharing, that's piling it on. And a lot of it is, you know, there hasn't necessarily been a lot of press about these cuts. So I'm not sure that folks are really aware of how deep they affect children and families. And also, you know, if we make these cuts now, 5 years ago, when the state turns around a little bit, knock on wood, you know, we're going to have more kids who we've already lost ground, with, you know, kids who need remediation services and kids going into child welfare and people going back on welfare. So,
Yeah, Howard?
What do you think we can do to generate some more press around these cuts? Because you're right, there hasn't been a lot of press, and if it's not brought to light, then folks can just do it.
oh, Howard, I knew that. You know, I held a press conference, Schuyler Center held a press conference with Chris Dice and with Prevent Child Abuse and a number of other home visiting organizations this past Monday. We did, you know, news releases and, you know, walked the Capitol, and nobody came. And we were really preaching to the choir. It was a great press conference, but there was nobody there. And afterwards, we took 2-year-old Morgan around and walked her around the press offices, and we got something on a Twitter feed, which was great, but that was it. I mean, unless you show up with 1,000 people protesting and getting arrested, you're not going to get the kind of press kids need. And unfortunately, we've never, as long as I've been involved in human services, been able to generate that kind of capacity and that, you know, that group of people. And probably because you folks and the people who are in direct service in child care and child welfare, whatever, are working every day. So, you know, I wish I knew. I do think that, you know, we've got a little play on the Winning Beginning Wednesdays. We decided to do it. Tuesday's lobby day in Albany, so we decided to do Wednesdays when it was a little quieter. And we have gotten some good response from that, but we're still not generating press. And we've been basically told in terms of submitting opinion pieces, op-eds, that if we're just going to whine about the cuts, nobody wants to hear it, that all they're getting from advocacy organizations is people, you know, that everybody, there is, you know, out there in the state, there's certainly a thought that we all need to tighten our belts, and I don't disagree with that, but I don't think that this population needs to tighten their belts any more than they absolutely have. So, yeah, if anybody has any brilliant ideas about increasing our, you know, our visibility, I would certainly welcome them, because, you know, a lot of work gets done behind the scenes and in these kind of quiet meetings and elevators, but I would certainly love to have a huge presence. And, you know, you see the unions rolling with their big buses and their advertising campaigns, and it's depressing that we don't have that sort of capacity.
Union people aren't working?
They're not working
during the day. So they're working during the day too, but they manage to get people going out there.
So in previous years, it was the 3 men in a room thing. And obviously, the cast of characters is different except for Shelley Silver. Do you think that's going to still work the same way, or do you think the process will end up being a little bit more democratic?
Can I say, I was in Albany on Tuesday for mental health issues, and what a lot of the legislators were saying is that Cuomo is using some little caveat in the legislation that he's going to, the same thing that Patterson used, right? That he's going to be able to push this budget through really with very little discussion.
Yeah, I would say that I started in Albany in '92, and I don't know that anything has changed. It's been a different cast of characters. It's been, I'm on my 4th governor. But it is still very much the 3 men in a room, and I think this year it's 1 man in a room, to be perfectly honest.
And that's what they all said, they all felt very
It's a
powerless, they
strange
themselves
year.
felt powerless.
Yeah, it's a very strange year, and I'm not sure, you know, we've heard great things from our friends in the legislature. I mean, really a lot of support from people, and I know that what I heard yesterday in my meetings was that each one House bill from the Senate, from the Assembly, will be supportive of a number of our issues, you know, rejecting the PPIP and stuff like that, and I'll be very, very happy to see it. I don't know how the conversation goes from that point. We are certainly focusing our efforts not just on the legislature right now, but still on the governor's office, and I think that it needs to be kind of that parallel strategy this year. But it's a weird year. It's always a weird year, but this year was weird.
How does the Schuyler Center relate to that other huge issue that impacts children, which is public education, and all of the issues about the funding of that, the cuts for funding, the cuts for taxation, et cetera?
Yeah. We generally leave that to our friends and partners, like Citizen Action, who does a great deal of advocacy, but our focus in prior years has been primarily on pre-K implementation. We did a lot of work around that. We're currently partnering with an arm of Citizen Action, AQE, on Quality Stars New York, which people may be familiar with. It's a quality rating and improvement system for childcare and pre-K providers to raise quality up. So we're partnering in that way. We don't generally get into the fight around public education or charter schools or any of that because there are other groups that do it. But if we feel that there needs to be a stand, then we will take it, certainly. We're much more involved in policy, like I said, around increasing graduation rates and preventing disconnection and that sort of thing.
Any other questions? So getting back to Liz's question, you know, 3 perhaps is optimistic, but you know, in the past we have tried to sort of settle in on that, and I think you're right, Jen, that there's these sort of broad headings that we have now, and I would think certainly the PPIP, that's what people are calling it, the cuts proposed for TANF, the juvenile justice reform, the foster care, and then health and children's impact on health are sort of the 5 big areas that I jotted down. I don't know if anyone else would throw something else into that pot as well, but you know, and then under those, of course, there are a lot of subtitles and headings, but I mean, I think I heard one of the larger sort of grumbles from the audience in terms of the PPIP and you know, TANF and the sanctions against the entire family and those sort of pieces. So is there sort of consensus that those are the 5 kind of large areas that we need to take a little closer look at? Liz?
You know, again, I'm much more about process than I am about anything else, I guess. And hearing that education is sort of over here and other issues are over there, and talking about consolidation and getting more voices out and getting more people behind in a hopefully fairly single-minded voice, it would seem to me, and I know all the different barriers that there are with education versus other issues, because there are so many. However, I think the 5 issues that Allison was just talking about affect kids' education, you know, in a big way, and their own mental health and their own overall wellness. So in some way, and I know it's hard to do, to try to get masses together.
Oh, I couldn't be more with you. I mean, I do think that, I think it all plays into education, right? I mean, your child is not going to have a good education if they're hungry, if they don't have a place to live, if they have mental health issues. It all goes into that. And education gets a lot of play. It certainly does. You know, one thing that's endlessly frustrating about the state is that, and New York isn't alone in this, is that the funding is siloed. So when I go into a meeting and I talk about how home visiting can prevent low-weight births and therefore save $2.4 million a year in Medicaid costs, what I hear is that that money doesn't go back to OCFS. It would be a savings for DOH. So it's not necessarily relevant. That's, you know, that's how we look. And And state ed is an autonomous entity, so, you know, I would love to see all the agencies working very closely together. But I do think that the framing a message that incorporates how it impacts education makes sense.
Any other thoughts on how we could sort of prioritize?
Oh, one message is that we need kids to arrive at school ready to learn. They're not going to be ready to learn if they don't have quality childcare. They're not going to be ready to learn if they don't get the early intervention services they need, if their families don't get home visiting services, if they're homeless, if they're not getting, food every day, they're not going to be able to concentrate, and then they're going to fail in school, they're going to need special education, they're going to go into juvenile delinquency situations, they're not going to complete school, they're going to become criminals, they're not going to be stuck in prison, but it'll go back to that one thing. You gotta make sure they rise in school, and that covers the whole age range.
Yeah, and I think the message has to be short-term benefits. I mean, long range, a 3-year-old who turns into the career criminal is, we all know that happens, but they want to know what's going to happen in the next 6 months. How is this? And so, so a kid needing remediation because they didn't get home visiting or something is down the line.
And that's always the problem. It's showing that those short-term costs, if we drastically cut that cost, we're going to end up with more long-term higher costs. And that's the problem. Of that prevention mindset has never taken hold.
Well, one thing that we've been messaging is that the governor's budget is just very short-sighted.
Yes.
That, this may be great for this next year, but, I mean, it's not going to be great for a number of people. But it's certainly not going to be great 5 years down the road.
Lisa?
The Business Council has been publicly supporting all the cuts. And really pretty much said, although we want to reduce the deficit and promoting that. On the other hand, when we look at the economy, if we don't have people that can do the work and have the jobs, that impacts our economy. Is there any way that we could link economic growth and job development and some of the...
I think that's one thing that we've certainly been trying to do specifically with Winning Beginning. And Winning Beginning New York put out a video a couple of months ago that folks may have seen, and I'll send it around, talking about, with business leaders, talking about investing in early childhood. And Ken Adams, who was the president at the time of the Business Council, spoke and did a wonderful job. We had a little bit of a disconnect in getting them to do anything more than that. But I got to tell you, having him on that DVD, and we're going to be we released it in the fall, and we're going to re-release it next month during Week of the Young Child. We're trying to build off that, certainly. And we work with groups like America's Edge that is tapped into the business leaders. I think we probably disagree with the Business Council on a number of things, but they did at least put their faces on video to say that they thought that early childhood was a good investment, so we're going to use it as much as we possibly can. I mean, one of our arguments about childcare is always, we believe the developmental piece of it, we don't need to sell the legislature on that right now. What we need to sell the legislature on is the fact that people cannot work without childcare. And so if you don't want people going on public assistance because they have to stay home with their kids, you better, provide subsidies for childcare. So the economic argument now is what's getting traction, not the do what's best. We all believe that, but I've given up saying it. It's all about the money.
And I know that Child Care Council and Kathy Hellis has circulated that video around those involved in early childhood. We also have it at the Joan. Cora, can you talk about that meeting? That's the end of the month, I guess?
I will talk about it, but no one here is invited.
Right. For your other contacts.
Sponsored by Chase Bank and the Child Care Council. We're co-sponsoring to invite business leaders. You can't hear me?
Right here.
I don't believe it. To educate business leaders. We're using that video. Kim Jasmine is going to be there. She's on the video. And talk to business leaders about how child care is vital for today's workforce and tomorrow's. And it's exactly that argument. And it's on the 25th at the community college is hosting it at their Gateway Center. So it should be great. If you have business people on your board of directors that you would like to attend, there is, I believe there's a link on the Child Care Council page. Is anybody here from Child Care? No. But we'll get it out to everybody, but remember, it's not for you. Seriously, you already know this. It's for people who don't know it, who are in the business community, who can kind of be a different voice, a very different voice for children.
Karen?
I just wanted to say, if we identify our 3 priorities and we frame the message and somehow we get the message to the policymakers, the question that will still remain for them, even if we argue it well and they agree, is where do I cut? I still need to balance this budget. So one part of framing our message is stepping outside of the box, at least I think, to identify other areas where we think money can be cut. Where is the waste? And I know that's getting into it really deep, but that's still the question they're going to be asking.
That's very true, and I'm not sure that I know the answer to that. We've certainly in the past put proposals forward, like the sugar sweetened beverage tax. That was something that we were in support of. Nobody's talking about it anymore, but they are talking about a millionaires tax. But I do think that, I'd have to look at the budget again to see where I think there's waste, but there's always a convention center or something like that that's not necessarily something we need. So I think that there are ideas to be generated, but I do think that that's what people are now coming back with. I mean, a lot of my conversations yesterday with folks were, okay, if I want to restore it all, but if I can't restore it all, how much is enough? Which is a bad place to be. It's not enough now at full capacity.
Yeah, Patrice?
Jen, you mentioned the Week of the Young Child, which is, I believe, April 11th, was that the week? And you're going to reintroduce the video. I'm wondering if we could all take as an action point to do something of the Week of that Young Child in terms within our own programs or advocacy and blanket it through Westchester. Here we have such a diverse group representing lots of people, but traditionally Week of the Young Child came in through the National Association of the Education of Young Children, and they kind of owned it for a while. But if we broaden that and look at it as the Week of the Young Child from everywhere, it would really be an exciting push in Westchester County and incredibly timely.
I think it would be absolutely fantastic. I'm the state public policy chair for AUIC, and I know that different AUIC chapters, and I'm sure the AUIC chapters in Westchester are doing something. We can certainly link you up with that. We can do something separately. I mean, one of the things that we decided to do was to re-release the video and to do it in Albany, Rochester, and Long Island strategically. But we're happy to, and I'm certainly happy to help, and I know that my colleague at New York State AUIC would be happy to to partner and to get you whatever resources you need to make it a successful event, right?
Barbara?
In the first slide, you indicated that about 3/4 of the state budget is already spoken for between Medicaid, education, and staff costs. And it seems to me that, although certainly we're talking in part about Medicaid, but a lot of what we're talking about is in the rest of the pie. And if we're talking about budget issues and advocacy, I'm wondering why we're not talking about the entire pie and looking at where else.
Well, I mean, I think in part because the funding is so siloed that, a lot of meetings that I go into, if I'm talking about human services, it's probably in the OCFS budget. So then they'll say, well, what in the OCFS budget would you have me cut? If you want me to restore home visiting, who should I, I'm not gonna say, cut somebody else. They're all really important things. I do think that, someone else raised the issue of really taking a look at, in terms of state general fund, where could we, and maybe it is, maybe it's a revenue raiser, or maybe it's a cut somewhere. I don't know where. I do believe that there's money out there. It's not necessarily being spent as wisely as it could be.
I think also we have to keep in mind that we need to keep the federal dollars flowing, and that we have to all contact Senator Schumer's office to make sure that money from the federal government is coming down. And it's extremely important right now to make those calls to his office because he is a key player. And unlike Senator Gillibrand, he has not made any real strong public statements in terms of this. So we need to get on him. Otherwise, without the federal funds, we're going to be in worse position.
Yeah, and I would encourage people, I know that I get a number of emails every day from national organizations asking me to make a call or to do something like that. I would ask you to do that. I'm going down to DC in 2 weeks, and that's part of my job to, to go to Capitol Hill and lobby for certain of our, our issues at the federal level. So, we do that as well. But I would encourage everybody to reach out to Schumer and to Gillibrand and to Nita Lowy and to, to everybody that, at this point, I'm leaving no stone unturned in terms of who I'm talking to.
We had also heard this morning that the way to get to Schumer is fax. You cannot get through on the phone, the email's not working, faxes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. The emails are not working, you can't get him on the phone, and the best way is to fax him. And I guess if we give Cora the fax number, unless you have it, is fax.
Oh, yes, we have it.
You have it? Why you can get it out to everybody.
I want to keep focused on the state budget for now because there is a lot of work to do at the federal level, and there's actually, believe it or not, work to do in the county. We'll get to that, but so where are we in terms of consensus? Do we have four or five things? And the reason we need consensus is because we want to take action on this. If we put out an electronic alert through everybody, and we need your commitment to circulate that and get your board members and your clients and your staff to activate that alert. There's no use in us having consensus if we're not going to take any action on this. So we need action on the electronic front. We're going to need people to call specific legislators. I mean, Susie's here from Amy Paulin's office. Did you wave your hand, Susie? Yes. And she's taking notes madly. And Virginia Noriega is here from Nita Lowy's office, and Alfreda Williams is here from the County Board of Legislators. So we have a lot of friendly legislators, but they need to hear from their constituents. So if we're not going to do that, we can all say, fine, take a piece of fruit, go home. But so that's why we need a consensus. Do we have some items that we're close to saying, here are the three things, they may not be everything, but for this year, for now, what three things are we going to take action on?
I recommend school readiness.
School readiness. What does that mean specifically?
But I think that helps out. I think that, yes, that certainly is the piece underneath that. And it taps into the health piece as well.
Okay. I think if it's too broad, if it's not focused on a specific cut, it's like apple pie and it's just not going to do anything. I'm sorry, Patrice, because I love you and I agree with you on almost everything. I think it's just got to be very specific about specific cuts. Right.
Proposing the P-tip.
I think that's one.
Yeah, I agree with that one.
I liked the five that you mentioned before, that seemed to really capture it all. And, I mean, if we had to prioritize, certainly the block grant one first, and secondly, the immorality of the sanctions on TANF has to be way up there.
Allison, can you say your five again, please?
It was the PTIP, the sanctions on TANF, some of the juvenile justice reforms, the broad heading, then the proposed cuts coming out of the Medicaid Redesign team, so some of the cost sharing, and then foster care, the support, the kinship and guardianship piece. So those are the five.
I'd also put on the agenda that early intervention is being cut 10% after a 10% cut last year. And there's talk of changing the system and limiting the federal system and maybe having a separate.
Karen, we can't hear you.
There's a 10% cut on the table for early intervention.
Okay.
And that's a 10% on top of a 10% less than a year ago. So it's almost 20% in funds that go directly to help children be ready for school.
So that's part of the 60% from the state that then has to be matched.
Right, exactly, and there's talk that, the rumor going around that perhaps New York State will split the system and have a very small federal funded system and then a very large or different early intervention system funded by the state, which would drastically reduce the services and coordination. And as it is, coordination is getting more and more difficult to be had, and people are waiting longer and longer, and not the federal mandate for 30 days till service is not happening in New York City. So I would definitely think that early intervention needs to be on this list somewhere.
When you talked before about juvenile justice and you talked about the shift to community-based treatment, and reducing, closing some of, I think most people will be in support of the reduction piece of being incarcerated, but what is the, budget numbers they're talking in terms of supporting the community-based, provision of services?
I can get you
Or is that gonna be,
numbers.
it's not gonna be under that, PPIP?
No, it's not under the PPIP. It's less than what the savings is in closing, but I can get you a number. Yeah, which is, part of our concern is if you're not reinvesting the full savings, how are you gonna provide really good services, so.
And then the second question I had was, if this budget went through, and say with the PPIP, and now the counties are going to compete, so there's a time frame involved there, and then they're going to ask the agencies to compete for the money and to raise matches. What happens there in between? You probably don't know this, but I think it would impact almost everyone in the room.
Yeah, I mean, I think now that, I think community-based organizations and local agencies that provide these services now sometimes find that they're not paid before they provide the services. So, yeah, there are a lot of unanswered questions, and I think that they're just now starting to think about how it would actually be implemented. We hope that they don't get to that point, but my friends in the agencies tell me that they're, certainly having some brainstorming sessions about how this can happen.
Many of us currently operate under contracts that are COPS funded, and we're certainly concerned, probably as is the county, about the notion of this 10% give back. Well, who pays that 10%? And how, the whole concept of a nonprofit, you don't have a profit that you are, you're able to put back into this. You've already paid out. How does the state expect this to happen?
I don't know that it has been thought out to that extent. And this 38% match is huge, especially for counties that will be trying to fund programs that have never had a match. Some of these programs have.
Well, the state asked for give back once before, but the county absorbed it. We don't know that the county's going to absorb it this time.
No, and I don't think that they can.
Yeah.
And I really think that the counties are going to be in a position where they have to decide, is this something that we can do without? Another word, there are any number of worries and things about this block grant, but also worrisome is that it's they're competitive grants. So if you're in a really needy community, but your grant kind of sucks, then you're not necessarily going to get the funding. So there are a lot of issues.
Is there anything on this list that people think shouldn't be on there? And this is the stuff that everybody here is going to be ready to support to some degree. You don't have, obviously, if you're going to meet with a legislator, you're going to feel free to give the specifics of your program, Carol, as why, and here within the context of all this stuff, this is what's going to happen to us and our clients, et cetera, et cetera. But unless there's somebody who's really uncomfortable with something that's on this list, we're going to have to, we'll shape it up and we'll get it out, because I think that time is up, if we're going to have any influence at all, which is a big if. But, it's imperative that we continue to be heard from, even if it doesn't get through every single time. We have to be reckoned with.
But you're now talking about advocacy with the state.
Correct.
Much of our advocacy has always been on the local level, so now we're.
No, but at state time, we do state advocacy.
Yeah, so it's.
Yeah. This is to our local legislators and to the governor.
To the governor, really?
Well, if we do an electronic thing, automatically it'll go to the governor. We say, send this to the governor. That's easy. I'm not expecting everybody to go to Albany to meet with the governor. But if we're going to write a letter, write two. If you're going to send an email, send two.
And there's nothing wrong with an old-fashioned letter.
Absolutely.
I sent an old-fashioned
That's
letter
right.
the other day, and within a week I got a letter from the governor.
Yeah.
It was a form letter.
Of course. Did it have a signed picture or anything? No.
But he said, I'm doing the best I can for the state of New York.
Yeah.
You heard his commercials, right? When he got the letter.
Yeah.
I'm sure they
Democrats like these, He's Republican.
We did invite him to speak at the not-for-profit summit this year, and he respectfully declined. It was a surprise.
Maybe he'll send his girlfriend.
Yeah, he does live in Westchester.
Okay, so we'll work on that, through our constant contact, we'll get it out, and again, just a few clicks, and we can send it off as closer to legislators and the governor. I did want Cora just to mention, some advocacy that we have to do at the county level before we start to lose people. It's coming on
Yeah.
30.
Okay, just very briefly, and thank you so much, Jen. I'm sure we'll get millions of emails after this. So we had this great advocacy at the county level. Do you all remember 2010? And we got a lot of money put back in. The legislators overrode most of Astorino's vetoes of additional money, which was great. However, it's not being spent. And we're now in a situation, the last time I remember this was 1994, with Campaign for Kids, and O'Rourke didn't spend the money, so we're right back there. So I think we should do, first of all, we should let our county legislators know that this is happening. I know that in Invest in Kids, some of the programs that were completely cut have been restored or been reinvigorated, but all the programs that were cut 7 to 9% are still cut 7 to 9%. For what reason? I have no idea. Just to say we can. That is what's happening, and that's really not right. I know in childcare that Title 20 is still not being accepted. Title 20 applications are still not being accepted. The paperwork to lower the parent share has not been filed. It's not happening. So that is not good. And we, I think we'll get something out to everybody that of what the situation is, and then again, we need people to, we'll tell you what to do. You know, call or email your legislator, let them know, and let's email Astorino, because this is happening like as if it's nothing, like it's behind closed doors. But it goes back to, and I was at a breakfast last week, Ken Jenkins and Peter Harkin and Jim Maizano spoke at the County Association, and Ken said, listen, we the legislators are willing to go before a judge and have the judge decide who can decide on this budget, because right now it's like a ping pong ball going back and forth. He said this, they said this, and everybody's interpreting the charter, but we have to know what the deal is, because somebody has to make a decision, and it can't just be continuously fighting. Do you want to say anything else about that, Alfreda?
Well, only that I agree with you wholeheartedly, and one of the big things was I was interested to hear that our new social service commissioner indicated that he hadn't restored the 5% for the parent share of the Title 20 money, and because he didn't think it was a priority.
So there you have it.
I think we should have a play-in, Cora.
A play-in.
Let's bring all the kids to the county legislator building.
Yeah, not to them, to us.
Up to them, and just say, look, we can't play in our daycare, so we're gonna come here and play. It'll get you your publicity.
Right. I'm happy to do that. I'm happy to participate in that. Yes, Howard?
What is the status of the lawsuit that was filed against the county executive last year?
Well, I think it's been joined by another lawsuit.
Yes, but where,
I
I
don't
mean,
know. Do you know?
Well, it's been about 6 months, so we're thinking that something's going to happen any day now. Enough time has passed, yeah.
It's still pending. There has not been a decision.
is there any way of moving or pushing the court? I mean, who has the power to move things forward here?
Just the judge. You know how judges are the judge, you know, they are not to be lobbying, we can't lobby a judge.
No, but I think we can possibly make some noise in terms of just questioning in the newspaper. You know, what is happening with the lawsuit?
That's fine.
And, you know, that might create an environment where someone would be interested in answering, because there has been a lawsuit, and unless that's resolved, I think the county legislature is left fairly impotent. I mean,
and there's another lawsuit that's been filed around the Section 8 workers, because the funding for the 38 workers that were attached to the Section 8 contract that the county let go of the funding for the workers has been restored, but the workers have not been rehired because there's no program anymore. And so the CSEA has filed a lawsuit. I know that the Board of Legislators is going to decide whether or not to join that, to say, you know, there's funding, you're supposed to hire us. So it's another lawsuit on exactly the same issue, which has to do with who has the authority to make a budget that has to be implemented. So there are legal issues, there's tactical issues, as Donna raises. I think there should be another discussion about whether we want to have that kind of demonstration, but I just wanted people to know that unfortunately the 2011 budget fight is not over and it's almost April. No, it's almost April? Yeah. So it's pretty crazy. And just as we were saying in terms of the state budget, once something is decided, when the implementation happens and what the changeover is such an unknown factor that it's all very abstract when you look at it on paper this way, but it's not abstract at all. It's families and kids and organizations and people's jobs and very, very concrete when you come down to that. So that was the update on the county budget.
Okay, so we will stay tuned. I do want to thank Jen O'Connor again for coming. Jen is going to hang around a little bit for those of us who are part of the home visiting work group to sort of bring us up to speed on that. Anyone is welcome to stay. We'll just move forward once everyone else has gone. And thank you and stay tuned.